morning, my name is Mateusz Mazzini and I have the utmost pleasure to broadcast from European Forum Alba. For those of you who might be not familiar with the acronym, it's one of the leading, most important and most intellectually stimulating European conferences on foreign policy, security and economics. My guest today is Professor Moritz Schularick, President of the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. Good morning.
Good morning.
Professor, I want to begin with a news item. Just a few days ago, Chancellor Olaf Scholz, during his visit to Moldova, pledged that the German support for Ukraine, despite the 40 billion euros budgetary gap, will remain stable and continued. How much of a political cost do you think Scholz is going to bear for that decision?
Look, we have to see what exactly he means, and it's always a good idea to listen very carefully. So right now there is still support, military support, financial support budgeted for Ukraine for next year. But as you know, there's also a plan to use the frozen Russian assets and the interest received on those to give to Ukraine. And in the past few weeks, it wasn't quite clear whether the German government what it means by we continue to support Ukraine, whether it means we support that you get the money from these Russian assets, which obviously are not German, it's not German money, it's just like, you know, someone else's money that goes to Ukraine, and it should, no question, but it's not German support, or whether they actually mean they're going to revisit the budget and find new money for Ukraine. So far, I have seen no indication of that.
Do you think there will be enough political support to seize Russian assets among the German political class? That's not a particularly traditionally German move to make.
No, right, that's a good question. So I think with what has happened in the budget talks recently, they have put themselves in a corner. Now they have to support it because they've very publicly said that's the way we will support Ukraine going forward. So it will be very difficult now for Germany, which actually was one of the countries that was kind of a little bit slow and critical of that whole idea to use the Russian assets and give them to Ukraine. Now they really have to move forward, and in a way that's maybe the best outcome of that budget fight in Germany, that Germany now needs to, really has to support this idea.
Does it have to support this idea because the clock is ticking on Scholz? We saw in June, right after the European Parliament elections, all of them were disastrous for the traffic lights coalition parties. Do you think time is running out for this government?
I mean, they have 1 year left on the clock, but it will be a lost year. That the coalition, the traffic light coalition, is pretty much done.
Lost in terms of lack of initiative?
They are no longer getting along. They will not have any major policy proposals. They barely can agree on the colors of the traffic light anymore.
Is the economy to blame in significant amount for this? I mean, you look at the freshly released data from OECD, the German economy shrank 0.1% in the second quarter of 2024. It is stagnant. How bad is it for the German government economically?
The economic situation in Germany is very unsatisfactory. It's bad. I think one has to be open about that. It's the economy hasn't grown in 5 years, essentially, and so there's a lot. There's long-term, medium-term structural factors, and there's short-term factors. In the short term, clearly, you know, there's been a housing crash. China isn't taking as many imports anymore. As a matter of fact, in June, for the first time, Germany exported more to Poland than to China. So
a notable event. Then.
Yeah, a very notable event. So, and obviously there is a big structural crisis in the car industry, and the car industry is one of the backbones of the German economy. So I think what has been overplayed a lot in the public debate is the role of the energy. First of all, energy prices are where they were below the Russian invasion of Ukraine, so they're no longer high. And secondly, you have countries like Austria, for example, where we are right now, that's still importing Russian gas, by the way, in significant quantities. And Austria is struggling as well because it's very much part of that German car industry supply chain. So I think we have a real problem on the industrial side, and so far there's no plan how to tackle that.
How much of that problem is caused by wrong migration strategy? Because there seems to be the case that migration per se as a concept became a toxic word in German politics. But on the other hand, I don't think any economy of the Western Europe, let alone Germany, can survive without a significant intake of migrant force. Is there a way out of this?
Right. Given the demographic developments in Germany, we're already losing workforce every year now. That means our growth rate will shrink unless we are open to immigration. Unfortunately, the immigration debate in Germany is very toxic because it's associated with what happened in 2015 with the Syrian refugees, whose integration, despite the very tragic events we've had recently from Germany and these attacks, has been by and large relatively smooth. But for people now, the word immigration means large quantities of not highly skilled migrants, especially from the Middle East and Northern Africa. And whereas the migration that we economically need is probably a very different one, but the two get conflated a lot.
So what kind of migration does Germany need?
Look, I mean, we definitely need migration in everything that's to do with the health sector. So I'll be very much in favor of just giving out 100,000, 200,000 work visas to nurses from the Philippines or Nigeria or whatever. That's people, that's workforce we need to deal with our aging population and the health consequences of that. We definitely need skilled immigration in all kinds of technical degrees, engineers, to help with the transformation of German industry from, car-based and machine-based to a more tech-based, in the future also more AI-based and green technologies. But we also need, it's across the board. We need teachers, we need educators. And first of all, I think what the country needs most of all is a change in the mindset, namely migration that we can pick, that we choose who comes, is migration that's in our economic interest. We're not doing this because we are particularly good people, but because it's useful for us.
There's a lot to unpack in what you just said, but I really want to press you on the issue of AI, technology, and what's usually referred to as talent migration.
Right.
There seems to be a consensus that Europe, in general, doesn't really know how to handpick the right type of migrants and is losing that competition against the US, which seems to be one of the reasons why the US is so technologically ahead of Europe in the startup ecosystem, for instance. A, do you agree? And B, is there a way out of this? How do we
I agree totally with the analysis. I think there's a joke now in the tech world in the US that Europe is the second world. It's no longer
not
the
particularly
first world.
flattering.
Not particularly flattering. There is also a rumor that US tech CEOs no longer come to Europe. Why would you go to the second world? Nothing interesting is happening there. And I think we need to urgently change that narrative. And right now, I think for the better or worse, I mean, there are some dynamic countries like Poland, but overall, the rest of the world looks to Europe as a very nice and comfortable and beautiful, but largely static open-air museum. And I think that would be very, very dangerous if that narrative of Europe takes root. We need to reinvigorate our businesses, and as you said, the startup and the migration question are a big part of that. I mean, to some extent, we have these 27, probably even more different languages that we speak in Europe, so that doesn't make it easier for migrants to come. But I think more than that, we need the openness to say, like, oh, it's okay if you don't speak German. We can do jobs in English, and you don't need to. One of the big problems of German migration is that we require people that we take in to work in their jobs where they have their degrees from their home country. So first of all, you need to do lots of. You need to go to the consulate and make sure that your degree actually is equivalent, and it all takes very long, it's very bureaucratic. But then you need to speak the language to be able to work in this job, which I think is not a very smart way. We should just get smart people and then see how we can use them.
Well, it all sounds very doable, but I find it very difficult to implement, especially taking into consideration that EU prides itself in producing a lot of regulation. Do you think we really need to move away from that mindset of being world's best regulators to
the world's best innovators? So I don't think we have a human capital problem in the sense that actually a lot of the talent that feeds the AI boom, a lot of the innovation is happening in Europe or by Europeans working elsewhere, working in the US. in other countries. So I think we have smart people, and by the way, we also have incredible sportsmen and women. If you add up the EU medals at the Paris Olympics, we're far ahead, I think 3 times ahead of both China and the US. So, you know, if we stand together, we have a lot to offer, and we are, in many aspects, the most advanced parts of the world. But I think it's really, really urgent that we come together as Europeans and understand that in this global economy and this also more confrontational world, we will only have a strong voice if and when we stand together.
Would that impulse come from Germany? Because we've grown accustomed to German governors, German chancellors being the leading figures of European politics. Now, perhaps less so. Olaf Scholz is very often criticized as a politician that lacks charisma, lacks initiative. Is there a way for Germans to re-establish their position in Europe?
I do agree that this is a moment in time where you need, an essential skill of a successful politician in Europe would be to be a good communicator, to articulate a vision, a positive vision of where we want to go as Europeans and what the promise of that is. And I don't see right now in Germany and other countries that type of politician being very prominent. Let's put it this way. So I would not expect much from Germany in the next year. I wouldn't expect that much from France either, given that France has a hung parliament and no prime minister yet. So unfortunately, we're in a little bit of a limbo, and we have to really hope that the German elections in September 2025 will produce a dynamic pro-European majority.
So what's next for German politics? Because that sounds like a very bitter pill to swallow, to accept that you might no longer be the leading country and the center of gravity moves somewhere else.
Look, I think it's part of that basket of things that Germany has to deal with. It had the 2010s for the German economy were quite successful, at least by European standards, partly because everyone else was doing so badly, with the exception of Poland. And a few others, but other countries, especially Italy and so the Mediterranean countries, were doing very badly, and Germany was still hanging on. But it was doing so in large part thanks to the demand from China, and that is gone. And then China has turned from from a support to a real headwind, because China is now competing head-on with Germany in many markets, and they're very fast, they're cheaper, and they're climbing up the quality ladder. That creates problems. We've seen this in the electric vehicle space. So there's a whole mix, a whole bag of problems that the country has to deal with, and that has been put off under Merkel. And that has been delayed because of COVID, and now is a rude awakening. Solving any of these problems that we discussed, that Germany needs to change, needs to embrace an agenda of change, needs to modernize, needs to leave behind its ridiculous backwardness and everything digital, will require willingness to take risks. And I worry about this a lot, because in aging societies, one resource is really, really scarce, which is the willingness to take risks.
Because why would you?
Why would you? Because you always stand things this way, and as you get older and the median voter gets older, why care more about the future? Let's just make sure that for the next 20 years things are okay. But I think we have to really change, and we have to take big risks, and we need the consensus that this is the way forward. The old German model, where you essentially build capital goods and export them to China, is not going to work anymore.
Turbulent, difficult, interesting times ahead for the German economy and German politics. Professor Moritz Schularick, Kiel Institute for the World Economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
That's it from me, Mateusz Mazzini. Stay tuned to TVP World for more live broadcasts from European Forum Alba.